article, and I don't know whether or not the Naples Daily News carried it. It was Lee County rock mine decisions endanger Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary, experts say. Was it in the Daily News there?
I don't.
Terrific. I hope a lot of you read it. In that article, they spoke about how back in 1990, Lee County created the DRGR, the Density Reduction Groundwater Resource Area, and how then in 2010, after a 2-year and 1.5 million study, they created map 14, which indicated those areas in which mining would be permitted when and if they could be established that there was a need for it. And then of course it went to 2019 when a new Lee County Board of Commissioners basically chucked the map and changed the rules and opened up the doors to mining. There were some pretty astounding and eye-catching quotations from the experts. I don't know what can be more important to this community right now than an abundant, clean, safe, dependable water supply, a local ecologist declared. How do you justify putting a highly industrial land use with being compatible with a groundwater recharge area? How does this happen? Asked a geologist. It makes no sense. Destroying 214 acres of wetlands, which is what this mine will do, would have long-term repercussions, said a professor who has studied wetlands for 40 years. There has got to be somebody who says it's insane to put a mining project here. And probably you folks are familiar with the fact that there were several public hearings in front of the commission. Experts testified, citizen after citizen after citizen testified, spoke out against this. There was an adjacent farm owner who took all the available legal means he could to stop this. And in the end, it passed 3-1. And with all civic and legal recourses exhausted, this is going to happen. And it's after reading an article like this, people think, well, number one, we have to vote the right people in. But our protections and the protections for the environment cannot be dependent upon who happens to be in office or who is not. After reading something like this, you walk away and say, there ought to be a law. Well, there is a law. It's up in Orange County. And at this point, if I can share my screen. Why can't I advance here? Do it this way. There we go. Is that changing for you? Can you see
it?
Can you see the Wekiva River and Kanalachi River?
Well, I can see Paul Arsenault's artwork.
You've got your cover slide, so it's on. You're on the first page of your PowerPoint. Can you just see if you can click to another slide?
That's what I just did and went down. Resume.
No.
Oh, this is going to be annoying. Let's see.
There we go. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, it's good.
Okay. So these, I want to share with you the most important clauses in that law. The Wekiva River and Econlockhatchee River, portions of which are within the boundaries of Orange County, and all other waters within the boundaries of Orange County have a legal right to exist, flow, to be protected against pollution, and to maintain a healthy ecosystem. With that law, Orange County, with its 1.4 million residents, becomes the largest jurisdiction in the nation to grant legally recognized rights to any aspect of nature. All citizens of Orange County have a right to clean water by having the waters of Orange County protected against pollution. Orange County residents are the only Floridians with this right. And as far as I know, they are the only Americans with this right. To this day, I find this absolutely astounding. And this is, it's not changing. Well, I'm going to read the next one. Orange County municipalities with Orange County, any other public agency within Orange County, and all citizens of Orange County shall have standing to bring an action in their own name or in the name of the waters to enforce the provisions of this section.
Am I ugly?
Bring your own chair.
I'm going to see if I can't get a little technical help here. Hold on one moment, please.
Here, or is it?
Eileen?
Joe,
Yeah.
if you want, you could send it to me and I could just advance the slides for you, whatever, if that helps you.
Can't get this slide to advance. I could do that on the computer. Yep, I'm going to try to do that to you right now.
Okay.
This one?
Yeah.
Is that it?
Go to the, can you advance to the next one? Go back up. They're not advancing simultaneously.
You just roll this thing,
You don't do it like this?
just wheel.
There you go.
Okay, and now you see the next one?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for that. So here, this important aspect about the law grants legal standing to bring an action in the name of the citizens or in the name of the waters to enforce the provisions of this section of the chapter. The rights of nature movement began with an article written by a law professor, Christopher Stone, which was entitled, "Should Trees Have Standing?" That ended up in the hands of Supreme Court Justice William Douglas, who said, well, they don't have standing now, but perhaps they should. So with the passing of this law, all of a sudden, there is just tremendous interest in rights of nature laws from all across the state, even in the country. I had a long Zoom call with folks in Colorado who want a rights of nature law for pollinators, for bees, and for hummingbirds. And when you consider that 1 out of every 3 bites of food we have are dependent upon pollinators, you understand the significance of their interest. They asked me, well, what do I have to do? What do we have to do to move this forward? And I said, well, first, when you're speaking to the public, when you're talking to your public officials, you have to establish the need for a rights of nature law. Demonstrate that the laws you have now aren't providing sufficient protection. Next, you are going to have to clearly explain what the fundamental concepts of rights of nature are, because some people have a hard time wrapping their minds around it. And then you're going to have to demonstrate what a rights of nature law can do that the current laws do not. And so for the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to follow that advice. And I'm going to start here and with Paul Arsenault, because it's because of his advocacy that I am here this morning. And I hope that some of you were able to watch that little 6-minute video about Paul that we made. If not, then perhaps you know Paul's story. He came here about 47 years ago. He's in Naples. He asked somebody, where should I go to really experience the essence of Naples? And he goes to Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. And he has a very significant experience. And from his book, I was able to quote this: "Sitting down in what seemed like a cathedral of the great giant cypress, I was overwhelmed with a profound and primordial sensation. I was grabbed in a manner that told me I must live in proximity to this place. My own taproots had found direction. In Naples, Florida, I was to discover some sustenance and a beginning." I think this is important? Well, I know this is important for two reasons. Number one, it's a great illustration of the profoundly intimate connection that Paul and other people have with the natural world. And number two, it is this experience that roots Paul in Southwest Florida. And for the next 47 years, he spends his time painting the iconic waterways and landscapes of Southwest Florida. And he's looking at them with an intensity and a duration that most of us don't have, because he does this by profession. And if you ask Paul, and sometimes even if you don't ask Paul, he will tell you what he has witnessed, which is the slow but steady degradation of our ecosystems. That personal testimony is relevant because few people look at it as closely as Paul have, but it certainly speaks for lots of people's experiences. Boat captains, fishermen who have been here just as long will tell you the same thing. And it was through Paul that I learned of this book by Mr. Penniman, and I think maybe Mr. Penniman or Mrs. Penniman is on the call this morning. I thank him for this book. I hope a lot of people have read it. In this book, Mr. Penniman informs us that red tides have exploded in Florida from 1878 to 1994. There were 64 months of red tide. Red tide happens naturally. But in the 25 years from 1994 to 2018, when he submitted this book to press, there were 184 months of red tide, and now we've got red tide back again, and people are being told to wear their masks and close their windows and not eat fish from the waters. He also tells us that there are 50,000 tons of legacy phosphorus sitting in Lake Okeechobee. He says that we have taken one of the basic building blocks of life, blue-green algae, and turned it into a monster. That has much to do with those 50,000 tons of phosphorus in Lake Okeechobee. He tells us that there are 2,440 waterways in Florida. More than half of all our waterways are officially designated as impaired, meaning they're polluted or they're suffering restrictions of flow. And one more potent fact, over the last 50 years, the same amount of time that Paul has been painting down here, the state has issued 23,000 permits to polluters. To read his book is to appreciate that the history down here in Florida is that we have never been able to find the political will to deal effectively with our pollution problems. To read that book is to understand how the 2020 Clean Waterways Act really is just same old, same old. Perhaps in the Daily News last week, you read an article, Florida's unclean waterways does very little. It was in the news press. Before Governor DeSantis signed that bill, there were approximately 7 environmental groups that asked him not to, because they knew it wasn't going to be effective. And in fact, it was just going to delay real action. And even more recently, I know this was in the Daily News, Calusa waterkeeper John Cassani wrote an op-ed. He's talking about the Orange County Initiative. The ballot question linked to the rights of nature movement is a clear indictment of Florida policymakers that don't have the political will to prevent further decline of state waters. Political maneuverings influenced by special interests that benefit from rapid growth continue to plague Florida with ineffectual policies on water. Mr. Cassani who is certainly one of the most trusted environmental voices down here, has also been looking at what's going on for the last few decades. By the way, I think this is also pretty darn potent. There was a research study published in 2014 by researchers at Princeton and Northwestern universities, a well-known study that compared all the laws passed between 1981 and 2002 and voter preferences on each policy decision. As researchers found, the policies overwhelmingly didn't reflect the will of the people, but rather the preference of special interest groups. Policies, note the study, tend to tilt towards the wishes of corporations and business and professional associations, and especially diverge from the will of non-elite Americans. And that is what we see in toxic inconvenience and what Mr. Kasami is referring to. The new approach that he is calling for is rights of nature. And so let me talk about that very specifically. There are rivers in New Zealand that have legally recognized rights, as there are in India and Colombia. Ecuador has a rights of nature amendment in its national constitution. It strikes some people as absolutely crazy that some aspect of nature can have rights. But if we go back 150 years and you were to tell people, you know, one day there are going to be women serving as associate justices on the Supreme Court, or being the CEOs of some of the major corporations in the world, or being vice president of the United States, they would say, you're crazy. But that was the thinking at the time. And even past that, and I can't help, I can't resist sharing something that I do every once in a while. It's from a 1954 home economics cookbook, How to Be a Good Wife. And some of the stuff today strikes us, either it's going to make people angry or it's going to make you laugh. You know, make sure you have a dinner ready, plan ahead even the night before. Over the cooler months, prepare a fire for your husband. Listen to him. You may have a dozen important things to tell him, but his arrival is not the time. Let him talk first. Remember, his topics of conversation are more important than yours. Have him lean back in a comfortable chair, arrange his pillow, take off his shoes. Don't ask questions about his actions or question his judgment or integrity. Remember, he is the master of the house, and as such will always exercise his will with fairness and truthfulness. You have no right to question him. A good wife always knows her place. My point is that there was a social paradigm in place back then that governed the relationships between men and women, and we had a legal system that supported that paradigm. I'm speaking to the League of Women Voters. You all know this is the centennial of the women's right to vote, and that it took, well, from 1789, when the Bill of Rights was written, to 1920 to get that right. And that wasn't the end of it. You had the women's rights movements later on. I know this is a very unsavory example, but as late as 1962, an American man could not be found guilty of raping his wife because she's your wife and the man has conjugal rights. Once again, this was the mindset at the time, and the women's rights movement was all about changing this paradigm and changing the relationship between men and women. Well, rights of nature laws are about changing the relationship between mankind and the natural world, changing the paradigm that we have right now, in which we see ourselves as being separate from and superior to the natural world, in which we treat it as a bank of resources to satisfy our needs, our wants, to fuel our economy. If we go back to Corkscrew Swamp, again, you're probably all familiar with when you walk into the entranceway, that first sign is of a handsome woman from about 100 years ago, even more. And she's got a hat on and she's got these feathers. And the sign informs us that egrets and herons were almost wiped out in order to satisfy the market for those feathers for women's hats. The next sign talks about how those cypress trees that Paul sat under when he came to Corkscrew Swamp all those years ago, how they were being mowed down. And that was the cause for the sanctuary to be built to protect those cypress forests. The Everglades. People come down here, oh, look at all this undeveloped, useless land. Well, it's not undeveloped. The same way Corkscrew Swamp isn't undeveloped. Nature has taken eons to develop that perfectly and fully for all the fauna and the flora that exists there. But we don't see it that way. It's from our point of view. And our laws support this unhealthy paradigm. Legally, we treat nature, and legally it is mere property, like a toaster or a car. And property owners have a great deal of latitude as to what they can do with their property. Another unsavory example, you go back a couple hundred years to the time of slavery, a slave owner could do just about, well, he could do anything he wanted to a slave because the slave was property. But this notion, and this is the hardest thing for people to wrap their minds around, that nature is not property. I mean, this notion that it is a Western and a relatively modern way of looking at things. The indigenous peoples, of course, have been telling us for a long, long time that this is not the way it is. Their view of us and the natural world is significantly different. They see it all as one community, the natural community, and we are part of that community. Everything is connected. All our relations, they say. We're interdependent, co-evolved. To be, the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh says, to be is to interbe. And inside a community, members have responsibilities and they have rights. And I'm sure a whole bunch of you are familiar with one of the most important environmental writings ever. That was by Aldo Leopold back in 1949, The Earth, the Land Ethic. And this is what he wrote. All ethics, and we certainly hope that our legal system is related to ethics, rest upon a single premise, that the individual is a member of a community of interdependent parts. The land ethic simply enlarges the boundaries of the community. It changes the role of Homo sapiens from conqueror of the land community to plain member and citizen of it. And to some people, I mean, this makes absolutely perfect sense. Emotionally, intuitively, of course, nature deserves rights. I can't tell you how many times I can't finish my 1-minute Rights of Nature elevator speech before people say, that's okay, I got it, where's a piece of paper, let me sign. If you saw that video about Paul, then you might recognize these as being the last few words of, I'm going the wrong way here, of that video. The human need for nature is not just a matter of raw materials, clean water, productive soils, an array of ecosystem services. Increasingly, research shows it is related to the influence of our natural world on our emotional, cognitive, aesthetic, and even spiritual development. And this is what our spiritual masters, poets, and artists have been attesting to since the dawn of language and art. There are tons of these studies. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the whole concept of biophilia, that we have this innate love and affiliation for the natural world. Nature is not like a toaster. It's not like a car. It deserves rights. And rights of nature is about restoring a healthy relationship between us and the natural world. So how would rights of nature laws make a difference? Well, rights offer the highest legal protection under law. You grant rights, you build a legal framework, and then the body of law gets built around that. Rights of nature laws are going to act effectively in two principal ways. And the first is as a formidable deterrent, like a holstered gun. Certainly, law officers very seldom must use their weapon, their firearm, in order to prevent a crime from happening, because the mere threat of doing so is persuasion enough. The best example I can give you of this is Pittsburgh. This is a map of Pennsylvania. All those purple dots are fracking wells or proposed fracking wells. All the green dots are where there are compressor stations. All the yellow dots are where there are violations to the regulations that are supposed to be protecting people and the natural environment. The man in the lower right-hand corner is a former Pittsburgh city councilman. What he's pointing to is that hole in the lower left-hand corner of the map. That's Pittsburgh. Back in 2010, because they were so concerned about the threats that fracking presented, they passed a rights of nature ordinance. That law has never been contested, and there is no fracking inside the city limits of Pittsburgh. That shows the efficacy of a rights of nature law as a deterrent. If Collier County or Naples had a rights of nature law in place, then don't you think the mining outfit or Lee County commissioners would have thought twice before going down this path of opening up map 14 to further development? I think so. It would have been a potent deterrent. And if they proceeded as they have, it did not deter them. Well, now Collier County, Naples itself, any resident in the city or in the county has the legal standing to take Lee County and or the mining company to court on behalf of their rights and in the name of the rights of the nature. And that is a law that they didn't have available. Well, we still don't have available, except up in Orange County. Would this be effective? Well, I'm going to be very candid with you. We do not have an example in the United States as yet of this law being used to sue a polluter. That is mostly due to the fact that we have had so few rights of nature laws. It has been used in Ecuador and other countries, but specifically in Ecuador, I know that a river was protected, it was in danger, citizens took the polluters to court. I think it went all the way up to their Supreme Court, and they found in favor of the river. It upheld the rights of nature on constitutional amendment. Another piece of evidence to suggest just how effective a rights of nature law can be is the fact that even though rights of nature has only been in Florida for less than a year, the state legislature has preempted rights of nature laws. And I'll share the provision with you so you can read it for yourself. This is the entire provision. They tucked it away in the 111-page Clean Waterways Act, and they did it at the very end, the last minute. This is what it says. A local government regulation, ordinance, code, rule, comprehensive plan, charter, or any other provision of law may not recognize or grant any legal rights to a plant, an animal, a body of water, or any other part of the natural environment that is not a person or political subdivision as defined in S 1.01, or grant such person or political subdivision any specific rights relating to the natural environment not otherwise authorized in general law, specifically granted in the state constitution. Shortly after the governor signed this law, a lawsuit was filed contesting the constitutionality of this provision. It's a home rule issue. Local governments have the constitutional right on behalf of their citizens to declare and defend rights of nature laws or whatever other laws they deem necessary for themselves. If the people in Coral Gables believe that banning single-use plastic bags is in their best interest and the best interests of the environment, why should the state have the authority to tell them no? If people in Key West determine they need to ban certain sunscreens because they damage the coral reefs down there, who is the state to come in and to tell them no? You know, a lot of people go down to Key West in order to go diving and to look at those coral, the coral beds down there. No one's going to go down there and pay the money to go see dead coral reefs. It's a home rule issue. I also want to note, well, I should note, we have, the lawsuit has been rescinded. The purpose was to make sure that if there was a move to take the Orange County Amendment off the ballot, that we could keep it there. So it stayed there. It wasn't challenged. We no longer need a lawsuit. We've rescinded it. But if you look at the second part of this provision, where it basically denies any rights to anything regarding the environment, it is so loose and so broad as to be meaningless. I do not want anybody thinking that this prevents the rights of nature movement from moving forward in Florida, because we have drafted a new ordinance that accomplishes pretty much the same thing, but circumvents this preemption. I can share an example with you. So this comes from an ordinance that might be put forth in Fort Myers Beach surrounding Estero Bay. I know you're probably aware that Calusa Waterkeepers is focusing on Estero Bay lately. Rights of the people of Fort Myers Beach. The people of the town of Fort Myers Beach possess the right to clean water, which shall include the right to Estero Bay, which exists, flourishes, regenerates, and maintains a healthy ecosystem. It focuses on the right of people. And it does not, in the main clause, focus on the rights of the environment as the Orange County Amendment had. It does still work into the amendment in some of the prefatory remarks. Whereas almost half of Florida's waterways have been declared to be impaired, and the state of Florida has now issued over 23,000 permits for the emission of pollution into Florida's air, water, and soil. And whereas Florida's environmental regulatory system has shown itself to be highly subject to corporate influence and changing political winds, meaning that ensuring clean water through the protection of waterways cannot be guaranteed by the state's regulatory system. Whereas the health and vitality of the people of the town of Fort Myers Beach is dependent upon the ecosystems which provide clean water, and the health and vitality of Estero Bay is a barometer of the status of the health of South Florida waterways. And whereas the health and vitality of Estero Bay is highly dependent on activities that occur throughout the watershed of the bay, and whereas Estero Bay existed long before human habitation of the area that became the town of Fort Myers Beach, and whereas the ancient existence of Estero Bay has accorded the bay and other waterways a special status, with the accompanying responsibility on humankind to protect them, and whereas many have described that special status as bays and other waterways possessing pre-existing rights to naturally exist, flourish, regenerate, and maintain an otherwise healthy ecosystem. Therefore, Town Council, City of Fort Myers Beach adopts this ordinance to protect the people of Fort Myers Beach and Estero Bay. That ordinance preempts the state, that ordinance circumvents the preemption of the state and still allows the rights of nature movement to move forward in Florida. So I'll finish up here so I leave a lot of time for questions. Just to sum up, rights of nature laws are about granting legally recognized rights to nature, to exist, to flourish, to regenerate, not the right to vote, not the right for free press, not the right to bear arms. It's about the right people to have clean water. A lot of people think we have this right, that it's in the Clean Water Act. It is not. Americans do not, other than Orange County citizens, have a right to clean water. It's about a recognition that the system we have now is not working for us. It's failing us and the natural world. And to a lesser extent, it is about a community rights issue. Just yesterday, or maybe it was Sunday, there was an ad in the paper for a toxic inconvenience. And it says it's a call to action. So the question here is, okay, what sort of action do you take? Do you keep on banging your head against the brick wall of the old regulations and environmental law? Or do you adopt a new law that is going to be effective? Obviously, we think that the way to go is a rights in nature law. We have been contacted. There are about 30 other groups in the state that are interested in advancing rights in nature laws where they live. If Collier County or Naples were interested in doing the same, it certainly would not be alone. So I think I've probably easily used my 30 minutes. I am happy to answer as many questions as I can and that you have to ask.
I have to unmute myself.
Thank you.
Okay, and I want to thank